about when we think about religious freedom is the complex interaction between religion and governments, and particularly between religion and the public square. Um, Religious traditions are one of the major sources of values. Of course, there are plenty of secular people with fine values of their own. But if we trace them back, we find that many of those values come from inherited religious traditions that have been passed down to them from previous generations. And in a time when civics, particularly in the United States, is hardly taught anymore, in part because governments were scared of violating separation of church and state. So on some level, they threw out the baby with the bathwater. Civics is not really taught anymore. And that means that invigorating the general moral culture is a challenge in which religions collectively have a great deal that they can do. So if we think about kids raised in a religious tradition, regardless of which one, they're exposed to religious values and ideas in places like Sunday school or religious school on other days of the week, sermons, the example of religious leaders, and opportunities for study. At best, those values get carried into the public square, and they're used to address issues of the day, hopefully in constructive ways. What usually happens is we notice when they are at their most controversial. For example, the deep divisions among different religious groups over abortion rights versus individual choice, women's rights, or arguments about abolishing the death penalty, where we see religious groups sharply divided. But what we should not lose track of is that an enormous number of values that underpin civil society are shared across religions. For example, a commitment to honesty and integrity, the desire to find ways to care for elders, children, and other vulnerable people, the need to deal with issues of immigration and fair treatment for Native Americans. In all those areas, humanistic values and religious values flow together. And when we are honest about that aspect of the public square, religious groups working together can actually raise the civic standard in important ways. So the notion that there can be an absolute and rigid division between church and state is probably a false notion. The question is, how do we permit maximum freedom of religion and mutual acceptance and commitment to pluralism, while also acknowledging that the contribution of religion to the public square is an extraordinarily important part of how we can hold our governments to the highest possible moral standards. As we have seen in recent months, the question of how we deal with deceit, how we deal with the people in the United States who don't have the money to pay their rent at this moment, people who don't have enough to eat because of the current crisis, and in some cases from long-standing needs that long precede that crisis. All those things are demanding of religious voices joining together with humanistic voices, joining together with the best governmental commitments in order to produce a society that is at core fairer and more just. That requires a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between religion, government, and the public square. And the defense of religious pluralism is at the core of what permits religious voices to have a constructive impact on the world in which we live.